To E101, Environmental Management 101. If you could today, we're going to ask you to go ahead and turn your cameras off and mute yourself. Quite a few people joining us today. So if you can keep yourself behind the scenes, if later on some questions, we may be able to allow those. But we have quite a few folks today. We have around 216 folks registered. Please turn your cameras off and keep yourselves muted. My name is Jennifer Collins, and I am the manager of the Pollution Prevention and Compliance Assistance, Indiana Department of Environmental Management. And if your camera's off and yourselves muted, we'd appreciate that. We have several folks still joining. Alrighty, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. If you could please turn your video off, mute yourselves. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome, and I hope that you're all here for the Spill Prevention and Preparedness E101, so welcome. We will get started here just momentarily. Please turn your video off and mute yourself, please. Good morning. Welcome. For those of you just joining, please make sure your videos are off and you're muted. So we're on the speakers today. Okay, let's see. So it looks like we still have lots more joining us. Just 1 second here. I'm going to give them 1 more minute. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today. We are happy that you have joined us. This Environmental Management 101 has been created for folks who are in the environmental realm and working in that area, may or may not have a background in environmental concepts, or may also just be learning in certain areas. They might know more about air regulations and less about solid waste or spills. So our group is the Compliance and Technical program here at IDEM, and we are the folks who are non-regulatory, and we do assistance for businesses. And this training series is part of what we do. Generally, we have these in person, and they might day of your time. And for those of you that have been with us in the past, welcome back. This is a little different today. We will be doing this, of course, on webinar. We are recording today, and we will have it posted on our CTAP website for your review again if you need to do that. We will be posting the presentations on that website as well, and we also have a couple other reference documents for you that we will be posting. And at the end of the day, we will be working on certificates for you all that attended, and sending those out to you via your registration email. So you will receive our training and to your certificate. Just if you are interested in using that certificate for getting credit towards your PE license or CHMM, you can use that to buy that you were at this training today. So I wanted to cover a few things today. I think most everyone is here or joining. If we can go over the agenda here real quick. So we're going to cover some housekeeping items, and in just a second. We also have first up the spill response planning, notifications, reporting, and contractor selecting. That will be about the first hour. We'll have some questions after that for both of our presenters. Then we'll have a 10-minute break, and we will then move into the spill waste management side of things, and questions, and then do any wrap up or final questions at the end. So let's go ahead and start the recording. I'm not sure if we've done that yet. And let's see here. So let me go. So just general housekeeping items. Please make sure that you are muted during today's presentations and that your video is turned off. We really appreciate that since we are doing this in a team, in a Zoom meeting. We appreciate the your control of your own mute button and your video. And if you have a question during the presentations, please enter that into your chat, and I will be monitoring those during the talks, and then we will ask those questions for you to the speakers at the question and answer time. Like I said, we will be sending you a link to the presentation and the certificates after today. So I will go to stop sharing this. And now I'd like to turn this over to our folks from the ER section, IDEM Emergency Responders section here at IDEM. And we have David Cage and Dwayne Caldwell joining us. And they will be speaking first about the spill response planning, notifications, and reporting, and then how to select a contractor for your needs. So let's see, Dwayne, if you could join us here.
All right.
And like I said, everyone coming on, please hide your video and mute yourselves. Enjoy today's training, and welcome, Dwayne.
Oops. All right, is that coming across okay?
Looks good.
All right. Well, good morning. Thank you for being here today. My name is Dwayne Caldwell. I am an on-site coordinator with the Department of Environmental Management's Emergency Response. Respond to spills all over the state. There are 6 of us that work out of Indianapolis, including our section chief, and 1 in each regional office. Now, our purpose is to enforce the spill rule, which is IAC 327 of the state. Waters of the state being surface waters, ground waters, storm sewers, just about anything you can think of. Now, prior to working for IDEM, I worked in a county health department and worked in septics, lead poisoning, meth labs, anything you can think of. I was probably involved in it. And my purpose is to promote pre-planning in regards to, that could be in the environment, which could be a fish kill or making water unpotable. They definitely don't need that. And I'd really like to thank you for being here today to view this out of it, because if you take this information and apply it to your purposes, well, then you're going to make your life easier, which in turn makes my life easier. And I think we can all agree that that is a worthy goal. So just thinking about pre-planning, if you will, imagine an inverted triangle, an upside down triangle. The top of that is going to represent a proactive stance, a pre-planning stance. It's going to give us lots of options, lots of time to work. The world's our oyster. Now, if you think of the bottom of the triangle or the point, well, then that's where we have few options and not much room to work. So I think we can agree on that once again, that having plenty of options is a good thing. Oh, that slide worked fine. And considering prevention and response before an incident, myriad benefits. We're going to prevent releases. One of the things I was taught in my hazmat classes is if it's predictable, it's preventable. And I think that's a good motto to live by. We could lessen the amounts that are released. That's going to save money with less product loss, smaller cleanup and disposal fees. It's going to shorten our recovery time. We're going to get back to business more quickly. Injury prevention, when you have something unusual going on, there's always the chance that somebody's going to have a contact with this material, or there's always, slips, trips, and falls. Cost savings, if you don't lose as much product, you're not losing as much money. Smaller cleanup costs, smaller downtime. Finally, you're going to avoid penalties and fines that could be imposed. If there's no problem, there's no penalty. It's money that you can use in a better way. Now, so I think in proportion to the effort that pre-planning requires, it really does have great benefits. Let's change slides here. Now, pre-planning considerations. One of the first things we have to talk about is what materials could be released. That's our basic question. That determines the course that all the other activities are going to take. So when you're trying to decide in that, think about the materials that are used in your processes there at your facility or that your trucks haul, and include in that automotive fluids, diesel fuel, that kind of thing. Don't forget cleaners like bleaches, floor strippers, that kind of thing. And even materials brought onto your facility by contractors or a cleaning company. They could be spilled on your property and cause a problem as well. After you decide what materials, well, what could cause a spill? Well, human error is pretty common. Somebody walks away from an open container, somebody else knocks it down. There's always malfunction of equipment, a gasket or something could give away. Or a failure of a component, solenoid A fails to close. Those things happen. Nothing we can do about it. Now, after we decide where and when they could apply, it's like, let's identify and think about the interventions we can use. And it's going to vary with facility and with mobile units like a semi, that kind of thing. Interventions can be training, making sure everybody knows that, when you open a container, you close it. or maintenance, make gaskets on line A and replace like they should be. Finally, even though we try our best, something's going to happen. And we have preparation. That includes having spill kits on hand, some personal protection equipment for use, and response training. You know, if something spills, what are we going to do? Who's going to do it? So in discussing what can be released, how do we figure that out? Well, one of the best I can think of would be a process survey. You start where your raw materials come into the facility or where the truck is, and you follow that all the way through to where the goes out the door or the truck is unloaded. Where is this material put into the flow? Is it changed or transferred to another machine, that kind of thing? Where are the points that something could be released? Let's see. What should we count? Well, hazardous substance, of course. Extremely hazardous substances as well. Hazardous waste, petroleum product, diesel, motor oil, used oil, and objectionable substances. Now, some of these you wouldn't even think of. They're not technically hazardous, but they can cause environmental damages. One that comes to mind is milk. Should a truckload of milk get into a creek, the resulting biological oxygen demand could kill fish. And when that happens, things get expensive very quickly. So just be right, especially those brought in by contractors, cleaning companies, other people. You might want to ask them, you know, what materials are you bringing in? Do you have material data safety sheets for these so we can be prepared? Don't forget items that are stored in back rooms or might have been forgotten about. Don't forget things that are forgotten. When I was in RCRA, I did an inspection on a hospital, and maintenance had moved a barrel of used oil out onto the dock to move one day. Just forgot about it and sat out there for a couple years. And during inspection, we were asking, what is this? And nobody knew. They ended up having to do a rather expensive determination to find out what was in the barrel and then dispose of it. All righty. So we're going to look and see how a spill could occur. Process reviews, just start where everything comes in, follow to where they leave, where the truck is loaded to where it's unloaded. All the points that are possible to have a release. Your past releases. Has an overfilled tank been happening before? And maybe we need to look at that and see what we can put into place in order to stop that from happening. Where the trucks are unloaded and unloading, are there points where a release is possible? Work orders. Is there a machine that seems to be down more than others that perhaps we need to look at and make sure that it's not causing a problem? Employee comments, as somebody mentioned, there's only a puddle of oil around lathe number 2. Something to think about there. Walkthroughs are always a great idea. Fresh eyes see things that we may not see. Possible sources of a walkthrough would be IDEM's own CTAP or fire department when they come through to do their pre-planning. Is there a business association like the International Brotherhood of Widget Makers who has a work look? And one thing that you definitely will want to do is have your pre-selected environmental spill contractor. That person who is going to come and clean up when something goes wrong. So they can take a look and see where they could stage, where are some preferential pathways like drains and that kind of thing may be there. All righty. Talking about interventions. One of the best is just to find less hazardous alternatives. Using a citrus-based parts cleaner instead of something with high VOC solvents. Periodic maintenance is always good. We want to replace those hoses and seals before they fail. Periodic inspections, You know, grandfather always told us that weight broke the wagon. If we catch a little problem before it grows into a bigger problem, then we're far ahead of the game. And looking for those preferential pathways. If my tote full of used oil somehow springs a leak, is there a drain nearby that's going to enter and cause a bigger headache and a more expensive response because I have to vacuum out the sewers? We definitely want to avoid that. We can also do some hardware alterations. Altering storage is a great way to help prevent a spill. One thing I like to promote is just to use smaller containers, smaller amounts. Yes, it may be more economically beneficial to order some gallons of methyl bad stuff, but if you only use 500, don't have too much. Should a leak occur, you've already limited the amount that can be leaked. Secondary containment pallets. And if you've seen these are things you can drum start to leak. The pallet itself actually acts as secondary containment and captures that liquid, so it doesn't get out into the ambient environment. Protective barriers are always good. Larger facilities, you have fork trucks running around, all kinds of machinery, and we don't want to put a fork through a barrel or a toad and cause a leak. Now we can also alter machinery. If abrasion is a problem in an area, why not use a braided hose versus a rubber hose? That way it'll last longer. Other considerations you can think of, well, unloading or doing processes during a less busy time. Would it be better to try to fill tanks at the end of a shift when everybody's kind of distracted thinking about going home, or doing it earlier? You know your own facilities, so I leave that up to you to make those decisions, of course. Preparation. One thing we're going to have to assume is that sooner or later, something bad is going to happen. Physical components wear out and break. Employees are distracted for a moment and a container falls over. Sometimes it's just plain bad luck. So we have to look ahead and decide what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, how we're going to do it. Now, preparation consists of three things. First, planning. That's the how we're going to do, when we're going to do, why we're going to do, that kind of thing. Resources. What are we going to need to do to accomplish our plan? Do we need boom? Do we need shovels? Do we need air testing equipment? And finally, training. This is an ongoing education and exercise, not just sitting in a classroom, but getting people out and doing activities. That way, response becomes muscle memory, and people actually have confidence in their ability to do the right thing. Spill plans. Spill plans are known as contingency plans. Now, for hazardous waste generator, the requirements for these plans are spelled out in the Code of Federal Regulations. Large quantity generators, they're required to have a full contingency plan. Small quantities, they need a basic plan. Now, conditionally exempt, or I think we call them very small generators now, and non-hazmat generators are not required to have one, but it's a good idea. You want to be sure that should something happen, you're prepared. Even if you aren't a hazmat generator, I'm going to recommend you put a plan together. And there are a lot of good templates out there on the web. Now, plans spell out who will do what, when they're going to do it. For example, after ordering the evacuation, the floor manager will alert emergency services, or driver will alert 911, then contact the company emergency coordinator. It's very important, though, in your plan to list these tasks by position and not by name, because people will retire, they'll go on vacation, they may be sick that day. Everybody's expecting Bob to throw the alarm, but Bob is taking the day off to visit with kids' school or something like that. So you want it not only by position, but you also want to have a backup or two in case the primary is gone. So redundancy is key here. And in the plan, we want to have a list of facility maps, equipment. Look, where did we put the spill kit when something is flowing across the floor? That map will lead you right to it. List of equipment is always good, so we know what we have. One thing I really want to stress is the plan has to be periodically reviewed and updated. Changes are going to make that plan invalid. Say you add a second line at a plant, or you went to 3 shifts. That plan needs to be reviewed and updated. Make sure it's still feasible. To refamiliarize participants in the plan and everybody else in your facility or in your trucking firms, and maybe ask for a review and suggestions from them. Okay, so what's in a plan? Let's talk about that just here briefly. First thing is going to be notifications, letting other people know what's going on. Let's switch my notes here. So notification and external. Internal, who needs to know about these things? Well, management, of course, because they're responsible. If you have an in-house response team like a fire brigade, got to let them know because they'll be the ones taking defensive action. Employees have to know what's going on. Do you want them to continue to work? Do you want them to shelter in place? Do you want them to evacuate? Now, what information? Well, that can vary with the person being notified, of course. The actions you want them to take, where you want them to go, all that. And you have to think about what means are going to be used for your notifications. Is it going to be alarms, like a klaxon? Is it going to be a loudspeaker? Will that be able to be heard over machinery? Radios, how many do you have? Or text, do you allow people to have cell phones? Whatever your situation is will dictate what kind of alarms you can use. Now, messages need to be pre-planned. They need to be concise and consistent. Don't ad lib. Might be good to have at least a template worked out. Now, senders and receivers should be familiar with that message. In your training, make sure people know what kind of messages they're getting. Make this a part of your exercises so that everyone knows what to expect. All right, then we have notifications that are external. Well, your first call is probably going to be 911, and that's a great thing. Now, if you have a spill, according to our spill rule, which is 327 IC, you have to notify the Indiana Department of Environmental Management's emergency response within 2 hours. We'd like you to do that as early as possible, but within 2 hours. And of course, our phone number is 888-233-7745. In addition to us, there's a National Response Center. Their number is there, 800-424-8802. National Response Center is very important. Anyone who discovers a hazardous substance release or an oil spill is encouraged to give them a call, especially if it's above the reportable quantity. In fact, then it's required. And there's also the oil sheen rule. If we have an oil sheen on a navigable waterway, that needs to be reported. Other program areas in IDEM also receive notifications. An example like that may be wastewater. If you have a bypass to sewage, you need to report to our wastewater section within 24 hours with the form that they have. There's also the local emergency planning committee. These are the folks who are the interface between responders and industry and the public in your area to help them understand hazards presented by chemicals. Finally, the public. Is there anyone that, any information that needs to go to them to make sure that they feel safe, that they know you're on top of things? So who's going to make these notifications? That needs to be in your plan. Of course, you want to report as much detail as possible, especially when you're calling NRC or IDEM. We love information that's like, well, we spilled 30 gallons of 1% HCl at dock number 2 around 3:30. Tells us exactly where to go and what we're dealing with. We have a quick reference sheet that you can find on our website that'll tell you what we need to know. And it'll also list a lot of phone numbers that you can use to make your different notifications. One thing we're going to need to know is who will be the on-site contact. Now, who should we look for when we show up at your facility or at the site of your vehicle problem? Telephone number, email to have. We also need to know, will this person have the authority to act, to write a check to do the cleaning? One problem I ran into when I first started with ER was a retail situation down in Johnson County. We had a spill of kind of an acidic floor cleaner, got out into a ditch. The retail manager said, okay, well, we'll get somebody to clean that up. Later on, the management a couple levels above her decided that, no, we're not responsible for that. That's the contractor. And the spill cleanup contractor was stuck with a couple frac tanks full of material and no one was paying him. Definitely want to make sure we're talking to the right person. Documenting the event, very important for insurance purposes, that kind of thing. Decide ahead who's going to take photos, who's going to take notes. Is there electric things you want to capture, emails and text? That should be part of your plan. And as always, if something is different, something's unusual, it's going to attract the media. So we want to make sure that you have a plan to who they can talk to, where they're allowed to go, all that kind of thing. Internal response, notifications. Are we going to retreat or are we going to take action? Do we want to tell everyone to shelter in place? Do we want to communicate evacuation routes to shelter areas? Make sure everyone knows the alarm. Make sure everyone knows the rally points. Where are we supposed to go? And who's going to count everyone once they get there? And finally, are we going to take defensive actions? Very important thing to consider. Now, taking defensive action is something that will contain or slow the spread of materials. It can be something as simple as closing a valve or using a drain cover over a drain or dikes, booms, that kind of thing. Now, defensive actions are not without risk. I'll have to tell you that. You may have inhalation, you may have this material. And of course, slips, trips, and falls again. But also defensive actions can have great reward. They can limit the amount released. They can limit the area affected. They can increase safety and lower cleanup costs. So as you can see, defensive actions are a good thing, but you have to consider, do your people have the adequate training and resources in order to pull them off effectively and safely? Did I skip too many? No, I'm good. Resources you're going to need, copies of the plan. You're going to think that you understand and remember the plan, but in a high stress situation, your mind's you're going to develop tunnel vision, so have a copy. I recommend having checklists so that you can check off a task as you complete it. Communications, always number one on any exercise or problem. Make sure you have enough radios, enough telephones, whatever you need to communicate. Emergency equipment, personal protective equipment, absorbents, booms, drains, shovels, all these things we need to have on hand. These are our resources. Training is the most important thing because, you know, when you have somebody who thinks they know what they're supposed to do, they can exacerbate the problem. If you have someone who's trained and can have a great effect on having a great outcome. You have to know the response plan and your updates. You can learn what can happen. your right to know station, make your boarding and safety training. People need to know their roles. They can count on everybody to do what they're supposed to do at that certain time. One action builds on another. Notifications helps people to get out to safety. Getting out to safety helps for accountability. Accountability means a fireman isn't going to run in to look for somebody who isn't there and possibly get injured. Exercises, super, super important. Exercises are going to tell you if your plan is actually feasible, if it's going to work. You can uncover weaknesses in the plan, find alternate solutions. Maybe, a gate is too small to allow a fire truck to come in. You want to know that before you have to be facing a spill. People are going to learn the needed task. They're going to familiarize your participants with that. And you're going to build teamwork. You're going to have everyone knowing they can count on one another during that time. Now, sometimes, even with our best efforts, we have a spill that perhaps we just can't handle in-house. And we're going to require some extra help. This is when it's a great time to have planned ahead and have your environmental cleanup contractor. Now, contractors, and we work with a lot of them, believe me, they are experienced. They have seen a lot of the things that can happen and have dealt with them. They're knowledgeable. They have supplies and equipment that you may not have on hand. They know the requirements, especially what we from IDEM are going to ask for, as far as perhaps clearance testing, that kind of thing. And they have that access to do confirmatory and response testing. Now, transportation people, a lot of times they use a broker. And this is a person who can tap into different contractors across the country. And they can use that ability to get somebody there to clean up for you. So this is pretty much the end of my little spiel. Just to summarize, spills are going to happen. We can lessen their effect. We can make them fewer by being proactive. And if we're proactive and prepare, we're going to be in a lot better shape. Just remember, if it is predictable, it is preventable. Or we can be reactive and hope for the best. And that's never happened. Yeah, well, it's not going to happen. And when it does, and we're kind of up the creek, literally, not a very good option at all. Pre-planning, it gives you options. It saves you money. And in fact, it only makes sense in the way of thinking. Because remember, our goal here is to make your life and my life easier. Now, here's a few useful links. First is our IDEM website. And pretty soon we're going to have a whole new section of the ER website that'll help you in selecting a contractor. And my good friend Dave Cage is going to talk about that. And I'm sure you're going to really appreciate the effort that's gone into that. Our quick references are, that's the sheet I spoke of earlier that'll give you information on what to report, when to report, and phone numbers to do it. NRC, Department of Homeland Security for Indiana, and even Region 5. So I'd like to say thank you for your time. I know it's kind of weird now that we're talking over cyberspace, and I wish we could all be together, and it's a lot more fun. But if I can be of any service to you, please reach out at either my cell phone number there or my email, and be glad to help you out in any way possible. So thank you for your time and attention. So I hit stop sharing.
Thanks, Dwayne. Well, just wanted to remind everybody, if you have questions today, please enter those into the group chat and we will handle those questions here in a moment once Dave Cage completes his presentation. Dave, you're muted. You'll need to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, I've already got that going. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is David Cage. I work in emergency response with Mr. Caldwell. I've been an on-scene coordinator for 26 years, same agency, and prior to that, I was a water enforcement case manager for 2 years prior to that. So today we're going to talk about complementing your pre-planning with selecting a spill contractor. So we're gonna talk about questions you should be asking internally as well as the contractors themselves. And at the end of our presentation, we have some valuable resources for both facilities as well as contractors that you'll be able to get onto our website and get more information. Let's see here. Where's your forward key on this? Oh, there she is. Okay. Okay, so to begin with, some small spills can be handled in-house, planning and the proper equipment. So for example, if you have a 10-gallon oil spill at your facility and it is on pavement, and you have the proper training, you have the proper, let's say, oil dry and containers to place the material in for disposal, then these are the types of things that you can obviously handle in-house without having to retain a spill contractor. However, some spills, due to the nature of the material and the quantity released, will require contractors that specialize in spill response. So let's take that same 10 gallons of oil, spilled on the dock, goes down the storm drain, heads towards surface waters, and now you're chasing it downstream. Do you have the equipment and personnel and training to address those types of releases? So just as with any in-house response, pre-planning is going to be a much more efficient and effective approach to dealing with an incident. So I don't have any pictures of small spills. We generally don't get involved, but I have a few short videos here that I want to share with you. So when you see these, or if these happen at your facility, obviously there is a need to get some outside help. This is fuel and oil that came off a property in Indiana and ended up disappearing into waters of the state, and we had to provide oversight on this. So let's start this one. And this was totally preventable. So let's move on to the next. And to give you perspective, this is oil that came out of the storm sewer system. Actually, it was a combined system. Give you some perspective here. This is about a 30-foot, 40-foot in diameter, and you can see this is not something that you would to deal with in-house. Some of you might remember this on the east side. We had a fuel tanker that exploded. I happened to be right next to it when it happened. Here. So as you can see, you will not be able to tackle this with just your in-house folks. You're going to have a lot of pressure from the press, from the local authorities, us as well, and obviously you're going to need a lot of help to address this kind of cleanup. So on the pre-incident side, so these are things to think about in your own organization to say, okay, well, what's going to trigger me to use? Size of the spill, is it 10 gallons or is it 10,000 gallons? Do you have the ability to obviously handle a release in gallons? The material spilled is obviously another consideration. Hazardous substances, extremely hazardous substances. Have the training and ability to address these types of releases. Location. Is it within your facility? Is it outside of your facility? Is it on a paved surface? Is it in a sanitary? Run into issues. If it goes to a sanitary sewer, it goes to the utility. You want to make sure that if that's the case, you're notifying those folks immediately that something's coming their way. Special needs, vac trucks, air monitoring, sewer cameras, frac tanks, sampling, respirators, supplied air. Do you have these on hand, or is it better suited to have a spill contractor provide that equipment? And speaking of equipment, obviously regular equipment where you have vac trucks, excavators, different pumps, sampling for real-time air monitoring, things of that nature. So that would be things to consider. And with that, you'll have a financial aspect to it. Can you afford to pay for the training and the overtime that might be required during one of these larger incidents? Purchases. There are shelf lives on some of the equipment that you may have on hand. Is it better for you to purchase this equipment, or is it better to have a spill contractor that has this material, and you can call them and they can respond to the incident? A few more questions, or a few more considerations as a facility of what you need to think about. Insurance. If anybody's dealt with insurance with their home, it can be challenging at times. Will your policy provide coverage for your particular situation? And will you need to adjust the coverage amounts? Oftentimes we get into situations, it's Friday night, companies are waiting for their insurance company to give them the go-ahead to hire a contractor or not when the time comes. So you want to make sure that you do a little bit of that your insurance is covered. Understanding that we will have you are responsible for the release, and then what happens between you and your insurance company on, let's say, Monday morning, that's between you and your insurance company. Authority, who in your organization can authorize hiring a spill contractor. If you can pre-plan that, that is going to be very beneficial. And redundancy, are they available when needed? Bob's on vacation. Well, who else can author? So, other useful resources. IDEM personnel. Not just the on-scene coordinators, but you have wastewater inspectors, you have underground storage tank inspectors, haz waste inspectors, CTAP. All these folks can be a great resource for you folks to get the questions answered before an incident occurs. From the emergency response side of things, we are not spill contractors as indicated here, but we have a lot of experience in spill response. We cannot recommend spill one contractor over another, but we can provide guidance. So when a scene happens and we have to talk to the facility and say, listen, you need to hire a spill contractor, chances are you're going to get 3 contractors that are close to the, so we can have a quick response from those companies. Industry associations, like your chemical manufacturers, you can obviously reach out to them with the supplies or with the materials you have on hand, and you will be able to get some advice from them of their past experience. Previous spill contractor use. If you've used one before and you're satisfied with their how they handled the spill, reach out to them again. So questions on pre-selecting a spill contractor. Does the contractor have the appropriate supplies and equipment? Do they have the adequate number of employees with the proper training to address your specific needs? Can they provide response operational periods? So if we go back to, well, we think we can do it in-house, and you've got, let's say, 2 shifts, 12 hours, you're running 24 hours. Will they subcontract the work, the response work? And the answer is maybe. It depends on the situation. Let's say you have an incident and you have they have 3 vac trucks, which is usually going to be plenty, but they need a 4th one. So they may have to obviously get a vac truck from another company to come. But you want as little subcontracted work as possible, so it's a company that has all the equipment on hand. Can they provide the required clearance testing? So confirmatory sampling. You want to ensure that we've met our cleanup objectives. You're going to generate waste, most likely. Can they do the winterization? Can they do air monitoring, for example? Let's say we have a mercury spill in your facility. Once the cleanup is completed, can they give you clearance so you can safely reoccupy that building? So question, selecting a spill contractor. Do they have 24/7, 365-day response capabilities? Just because your business is 9 to 5, let's say, chances are it's not going to happen during those hours. It's going to happen after hours or on the weekend or again on Friday night. Other questions would be location. If you're a fixed facility, oftentimes, you a quicker response from somebody who's closer to your facility, but that's not always the case. So you need to ask these questions when you're soliciting a spill contractor and know their time frame. If part is transportation, and let's say you're located in Lake County and you have a contractor in Lake County, does it make sense for that contractor to be traveling down to, let's say, Louisville, where if one of your transports has an incident? So these are some of the questions that you need to ask. Multiple methods of contact. More pre-planning is going to help, as we've talked about, as far as a stressful situation. 20 emergency contact. You've got to make sure, obviously, you have these numbers and your folks are trained to call first, and so on. So you'll have non-emergency contacts if you've that you already have relationships built with these spill contractors, and you'll be able to make it a much easier process during a difficult situation. So the benefits of pre-selection. Pre-planning does equal a more efficient response. You can contact these spill contractors. You can have and get your vulnerabilities. What can they assist in your give you some information as to what you need to minimize your exposure. Again, provides an expedient response. Your contacts have been established. Your communications have been established as well. So do they have the needed supplies? They'll have the needed supplies based on your pre-established contract agreement. So most Spill response companies will not respond unless you put a retainer down. These can already be pre-established, so it's saving time, and we'll manage to get a quicker response to a scene. So let's say a company wants $5,000 for them to respond. They sign a contract, or they send a contract over. Your authorized personnel signs that contract. It comes back, and then they will roll. That's going to take a little bit of time, and obviously time is of the essence. So this is the great time to ask, what if we release X, where's it going to go? What's it going to do? How's it going to impact the environment and or public health? And again, the whole idea is to reduce the stress in a stressful situation. You are going to have, when these happen, and oftentimes when they do, it's the first time that a company has hired a contractor, so we have to take them through that process. You're going to have the fire department, police department, you're going to have general public, you're going to have other outside agencies that are pretty much asking the same question. It gets stressful very quickly. The more stress you can reduce, the better. So really quickly, so now you've had a spill. One of the key things if you run a 24-hour operation is safety of all the personnel, making sure that everybody is accounted for. You should have an evacuation plan, and when you do, make sure there's redundancy built into that as well. You have, let's say you have a fire at your facility and your gathering place is at the east side of the facility and the smoke is blowing to that direction. Make sure you have a backup spot where your personnel can gather if you're evacuating, and you can account for everyone. General public is going to be a close second on the safety, and that's where if be impacted, you most definitely need to call 911. Weather conditions. Is it raining? Is it snowing? Is it sleeting? Night safety. Are you next to water? Are you on the side of a highway? Things of that. Safety is going to be paramount. So then you've contacted 911. All the responders show up. Various agencies show up. They're going to try and stabilize the spill as best they can, but they are not spill contractors either. They will try and minimize the impact, but ultimately it's going to be up to you to hire a spill cleanup contractor to come in and dispose of any waste and any follow-up that's needed. Assessing the extent of impact. Is it in the storm sewer? Is it heading towards a wastewater treatment plant? Is it heading to surface water? All these things you need to take into consideration. And then the next call would be to your spill contractor. So we've had this happen, and you need to give as much detail as possible to the folks on the other end of the phone as to what they need to bring to the incident. We talked about before, notify the IDEM spill line. So we will, as on-scene coordinators, any time of day, we will communicate with the emergency personnel on site, and we'll get a better feeling for what is going on and whether or not we need to respond as well to the incident. And we may or we may not, if it's big enough, the on-scene coordinator will respond to the incident, and then we will start coordinating efforts between all the different agencies, as well as your spill contractor and anyone else that is involved. So once it's your release has been stabilized, the OSC will work with the company or contractor to remove any impacted soils. So what we will need at the end is obviously disposal of the soils, disposal of the liquids, confirmatory samples, and what your contractor will be able to do is put that in a nice package that goes from beginning to end, detailing the incident. And those include what took place and what they needed to do as far as removal of soils, cleanup, anything that was impacted. So now we get to the good stuff. We have recently gone live with a spill contractor document, contractor, and a spill contractor map. This just happened yesterday, and what that will do is allow the facility, or allow you as a facility organization to go through and pre-select a spill contractor. On the guidance material, we have a few things. We'll start there, and then I'll end with the spill contractor information. So guidance material on our website, we have obviously the spill rule, and I believe it starts on page 114, where we talk about obviously your requirements as an organization to notify what needs to be reported. And keep in mind, if the release isn't reportable or you're unsure, call, let us know. It's better to err on the side of caution than to wait and obviously risk a violation with not reporting it. On our website, which is obviously IDEM, and then you go to emergency response, we have other guidance material with emergency response definitions. We have quick reference guide link, as it says here, about different important numbers that you may need to reference, and it also has an information sheet which gives you who, what, where, when, and how. So let's circle back to the spill contractor, selecting a spill contractor. We have reached out, many of you on this presentation are spill contractors. We've reached out to those folks to obviously help in getting you prepared to possibly use a spill contractor or get pre-selected. So a lot of the information that we talked about the company being available 365 days a year, 24/7. That has, when a contractor gets in touch with us, they have to pre-qualify. So they have, are they 24-hour capable? Do they have the right equipment? Are they trained properly? Disposal, final cleanup reports. These are pre-qualifications for the contractor to say, yes, we assess that we are available to do all those things. And then what they do is the contractor will fill out a spill response contractor form. And what happens with that information is their location goes on a map that anybody can access and say, okay, well, these are the closest ones to our facility. Let's reach out to these folks and see what they can offer. The list is not all inclusive, so it's whether or not the spill contractor wants to get on our map and obviously link the spill contractor to say, okay, well, we offer this, and we can go from there. So it has gone live as of yesterday. We are going to have to work out some bugs. Obviously, we have not populated the map as of yet, because that's going to take the contractors to get onto our website if they're not already doing so as I speak. And then within the next few weeks, we should have a fairly good map of folks that you, as industry, can reach out and ask these questions. There's also a small area about pre-planning. So a lot of the things that we've talked about today, both myself and Mr. are on that on those documents as well. So there's going to be redundancy in a lot of areas on our website. So in summary, spills will happen, and there will definitely be a cost to your company. And you can handle some small spills. Is it easier to be handled by an outside spill contractor? Pre-planning is one of the biggest things. We cannot stress it enough. The more you pre-plan, the easier the situation is. And it won't be easy even after you pre-plan, but it'll be much more efficient for you to look at these things pre-incident as it is than when the incident occurs. So in summary, I just want to thank you for your time. I have my information here. Please feel free to contact us anytime. We will field your questions. Prefer if they're non-emergency questions to be, but we are available 24/7. So if you need to, please contact me, or you can contact the spill line at 888-233-7745. Thank you for your time. Now what do we do? Oh.
Thanks, Dave, for your presentation. And I have, I think I do not have any questions from the chat. If anyone has anything that they would like to ask either Dwayne or Dave, please go ahead and put that question in. Okay, we do have a question. Do you have to pay to pre-select a contractor, like a retainer fee?
You shouldn't have to. I'm not muted, am I?
You're on.
Okay. No, I've spoken to several of the contractors, and they're already doing this in a lot of instances. They can come over to your facility and obviously provide some guidance. It's essentially like taking a bid. They'll come in and they'll work with you, and it's obviously going to be your comfort level as to who you want and their capabilities.
Had another question come in. How do we handle runoff from a fire? Is that considered a spill that needs to be reported?
Well, yes. Oftentimes we're going to get, and here's the importance of contacting us. It may not be reportable, but we may get a call from the local authorities. They'll often call us. But to answer the question as far as spill runoff, it depends what's in that runoff. But yes, we need to be very aware of that. We just had one recently, I believe last week. We thought everything was on site and it was disappearing towards the wastewater treatment plant, which can be bad based on whatever is burning in the fire. So those do need to be reported. We had a large plastics fire years ago down in Lawrenceburg, and we had plastic going out into the river there. You know, these are things that we need to be aware of, so we can notify all the folks downstream and make sure that we don't have any issues down there with a water intake or with a recreational area.
So it goes back to pre-planning and knowing what is in each area on their site.
Absolutely. I mean, do you want to contain everything? Well, not necessarily. You have gasoline, for example. Do you want to contain that? Well, that could create another issue. But all the pre-planning that you do, you will be able to obviously see these things. And do you have a valve system on your or a control system on your stormwater? Can you contain things? The smaller you keep it, the easier it's going to be. And if it's not even reportable, you can always obviously contact us and we can give you advice or point you in the right direction in our agency or for the local folks to assist.
We have another question. Are your reports for an ER response in RM or SharePoint? When they're doing a follow-up, sometimes it's difficult to locate those.
Well, yes, we have an RM report, so that's going to be our incident report. And then when the spill contractor or whoever sends us a final cleanup report, we will review that, and then those documents are uploaded to our virtual file cabinet.
Okay, great. And we have another question. Does item spill line make all notifications for federal reporting, or is that still up to the facility?
It's up to the facility, but there's checks and balances. I always tell everyone, let's say you have a waste inspector, or you have a hazardous waste permit or a solid waste permit, always contact those folks. better for them to hear from you first. We will do our checks and balances. We will make those notifications. I like to give folks the opportunity to call them and be the first to say, hey, listen, we had this happen. We called it into the spill line. And soon after, the OSC is probably going to get in hold of that inspector. But no, we are not the ones that will contact the other notifications. The LEPC National Response Center, which goes through the Coast Guard, reaches out to EPA. And what happens, we get those notifications as well. So there's multiple ways that we get notified. So no, the responsibility solely lies on the facility to contact and notify.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see. And we have another question. How do you handle an employee's car in the parking lot leaking either fuel or antifreeze near us? They could do.
Well, you have a little talk with them, and it's ultimately the facility. You know, whatever happens on the facility, it's their responsibility. We would be looking at the facility to handle that if the release is going to a storm drain. After that, then obviously there'd probably be attorneys involved if the facility decided they wanted to obviously take action. But if they're not going to be complying with what the facility asks, then they could lose possibly.
Right. That's not good.
No.
So they don't want to lose their job.
No.
Is there a quick reference guide of what types of incidents are required to be reported to ER? And how can a company get confirmation or proof of them contacting the ER group? Do they get any receipt or of the call, or can they get a copy of the log?
So the reference is going to be in the spill world. That's going to be 327 IAC 2-6. There are other reporting requirements. Let's say if you have an underground storage tank facility, there's other reporting requirements there. But it gets into the quantity, reportable quantities, and those change. You know, you can if your facility sits in a wellhead protection area, those numbers are far less than what they would be if you're in the middle of a field. So you have to be very aware of what the law says as far as the spill rule, but also as well as other areas that you might need to notify, like the local emergency planning committee, National Response Center. As these things grow, obviously more agencies are involved. Now, the second part of that question, what was the second part of the question? Oh, yes. As far as when they call us, we generate it's an RM number. If it's after hours, you may end up using the responder's name until we get a number back to you. So there is a number associated with each release or each call into the agency.
We have a comment that's from John Linkwitz that says, all calls will be documented in an RM report, which will be posted to the virtual file cabinet. So he also stated the same thing. Okay, any other questions from anyone? Okay, I see no further questions. Thank you so much, David and Dwayne. And we are going to, I know, hiding behind the wall there. There you are. Thanks for joining us this morning. We will be taking a 10-minute break now to refresh yourself and come right back, and we will continue with our agenda. After that break, we will have Tracy Barnes of the CTAP staff talk about spill waste management. We'll see you back in 10 minutes.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks.
How do we do?
We hit really well on time.
We did?
Yep.
Good. Jennifer, can you hear us?
Yes, and so can everyone else. Welcome back, everybody. We are ready for our next session, and it is my pleasure to introduce Tracy Barnes of our Compliance and Technical Assistance program. She recently joined our CTEP program last year and has been with the agency for quite some time. She has worked in the Office of Land Quality previously for many years and doing a variety of things. And she can tell you more about her background. And I'll turn it over to you, Tracy.
Okay, thanks. Where I am. Okay, well, thank you, Jennifer, and thanks to Dave and Dwayne. That was a great presentation this morning. I do keep getting messages popping up. My internet is unstable and I've tried everything I can. So hopefully this will go well this morning and you'll be able to hear me okay. So the next step in the process, we've talked about pre-planning, about responding to your spill. And once you've done those things, you're probably going to have some waste that you're going to have to manage afterwards. So this presentation will take you to the next steps that you need to go to. I do want to say that my presentation is at a very high level. So I'm going to give you some basics on hazardous waste episodic events, for example, but there are going to be a lot of requirements that I'm not going to be able to cover given the time and just given the scope of what I want to do today. So just be warned, don't take my presentation as a complete guide that will step you through everything that you need to do. You probably need some help either from a contractor or IDEM staff. I have an overview of my presentation. We're first going to talk about what is waste. And I think it's pretty obvious when we have a spill that that's going to be disposed of. But I want to step back and look at that really quick first before we go forward, because there are different types of waste that we need to talk about. We need to talk about hazardous waste and we need to talk about solid waste. Then we're going to talk about what you do with your waste, and that is doing a waste determination, looking at hazardous waste disposal options, solid waste disposal, and then we're going to take a quick peek at what do you do if you have liquids versus solids. Now, my very first slide here is one of the few regulatory citations I'm going to include, and this is the definition of solid waste in our Indiana statute. You can see it's pretty lengthy. There's a lot of words there. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm going to pull out a couple words that are really going to help us understand what it is without having to read the whole thing. First of all, a solid waste is basically garbage, refuse, sludge, or other discarded materials. Garbage is food-related waste. Refuse is rubbish or trash. And then the term other discarded pretty much is a catch-all for anything. So when you've decided it's no longer useful, it's going to be a waste. It's going to be a solid waste. The other thing about solid waste is that it's not limited to things that are just solid. You can have a material that's semi-solid, liquid, or contained gas. Those might all qualify as being solid waste. Now, what is not a solid waste? It's a pretty short list of things, and some of these are regulated somewhere else. For example, the first example is waste that's legally discharged under the Clean Water Act. Think of domestic sewage or a point source discharge regulated under the NPDES permitting program. Those are going to be regulated under clean water, so they won't be considered a solid waste. We have spent nuclear waste. We have manure or crop residues, and then finally, compost at a facility that has a registration in Indiana. The solid waste is generally divided into two broad categories. We have solid waste on the top in the middle there that you see, and I've listed some examples over to the right of things that are solid waste. They're non-hazardous solid waste. And then the other major type of waste we have is actually hazardous waste. And when you see to the right of the hazardous waste box, you see listed waste and characteristic waste. So those are the two main types of hazardous waste that we have. Do you want to talk about that term hazardous before we go any further? Because sometimes it can get confusing when you hear of things that are hazardous materials or hazardous substances or hazardous waste. So they all sound very similar. And you can see from the Venn diagram that there is some overlap, but there's also some distinction between the three of them. So what is that difference? Well, hazardous substances are used mainly by EPA in the Superfund program, or it's called the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. Hazardous materials are defined by DOT, and by DOT I mean Department of Transportation Hazardous Materials Regulations. Do you want to note at the state level, you don't call the Indiana Department of Transportation if you have hazardous materials questions. You call the state police. They have a motor carrier division that implements those rules. And then lastly, hazardous waste was defined by EPA for the RCRA, or the Resource Conservation Recovery Act program, which covers both solid and hazardous waste at the federal level and in Indiana. So now that we have kind of drawn some distinctions between those other things that are called hazardous waste, we're really going to focus on hazardous waste at this point. So we're going to go into those two that are over to the right, the listed and the characteristic waste. We're going to talk about listed waste first. Listed waste is just as it sounds. It's pretty obvious. It's on a list. And there are 4 different lists for hazardous waste. The first two are from, well, the first one is from non-specific sources. That's the F listed waste. K listed waste is from a specific source. And the U and the P are unused chemical products and or formulations. Characteristic waste, on the other hand, is a waste that exhibits a characteristic that makes it hazardous. And there's 4 characteristics that are under the listing for characteristic waste. We've got ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, and toxicity. Toxicity is evaluated using the toxicity characteristic leaching procedure, or TCLP. So if you're familiar with that test, that would be the toxicity characteristic that you're looking for. So if you have a spill waste, you have to figure out which regulations apply. So how do you do that? Well, you do something that's called a waste determination. And when I begin talking about waste determinations, I'm speaking very broadly. We need to figure out if this is a solid waste, if it's a hazardous waste. You can look very specifically at a hazardous waste determination, and that's very important, and it's something that we're going to walk through in a minute. But do know that there are other things that might cause your waste to need special handling. For example, if you have a waste that is dusty, you'll need to know that. If you have waste that contains PCBs, you'll need to know that as well, because there'll be extra requirements that you have, and maybe different disposal options, or it might be more of a lack of options if you have PCBs. So who does that? Who does the waste determination, or who's responsible? It is the generator, and the generator is the person that first causes that waste to be a waste. So even though you can get help, you can look to a contractor, a laboratory, IGEM can help you, but the generator is ultimately responsible. And if heaven forbid it comes to the point where you have an enforcement case against you by IGEM, we usually cite the generator in those cases. We did have one case, and it was very interesting just to illustrate. Back when I was in land, we had an enforcement case, and the generator had sent a sample to a laboratory in Ohio. Well, the type of waste that it was, and with the test results in Ohio, it would be exempt. So in the lab report they gave back to the company, they indicated that it was not a solid waste. And they provided the waste as clean fill to a farmer. And so we ended up getting that referral, and they had to go out and remove all of that. And it was a type of foundry sand. So just be aware that laboratories really are not in a good position to help you with that. So let's look more closely at a waste determination. As I mentioned already, it's when you figure out the regulatory status of a waste, whether it's solid waste, hazardous waste, might contain PCBs. And how it's done is by using testing or knowledge. Now, the testing that I'm talking about here is testing that's done in a laboratory, and they're going to follow a method that's specified in a rule somewhere. Now, knowledge can include some screening testing. It can include safety data sheets. It can include information on the process that generates the waste. Now, think back a few slides ago where we were talking about listed waste, and there were some that were source specific. Well, you really have to know the process, the industrial process that's associated with that to figure out if you have a K-listed waste. So generator knowledge is very important, and I think sometimes it gets short shrift, or it gets misplaced or minimized. Oh, that's just generator knowledge. Well, generator knowledge is actually very critical in this process. Testing is important too. When you need to do testing, because knowledge alone isn't sufficient. So they both kind of work hand in hand together, and there's one that's not more important than the other. So when do you do that? You do it at the point of generation. And even though that word point of generation, or that phrase point of generation, might indicate a particular place, it is a place. It's the place at which that waste first becomes generated. But you also have to think about time, because it's also the time at which it was generated. And in many instances, you can sample or you can evaluate at that point, at that particular location, at that particular point in time. But Dave showed us an example earlier where they had a fire and an explosion. That waste was being generated at that time, but it wouldn't be safe to go in and sample then, or to do a full evaluation. So you can wait until the fire's died down, till the debris is cooled, if that's the case. But if there is no limiting factor, you really should get your samples as quickly as possible. So then what's next? So you've done your waste determination, you've put together your knowledge and your testing, and you've determined that your waste is either a solid waste or a hazardous waste. Well, if it's hazardous waste, I've listed the citations there for the federal and state regulations. And I also want to point out that hazardous waste is regulated from cradle to grave. If you weren't aware of that, I think most of you are, but just to point that out. So it does start with the generator and ends with the disposal facility. On the other hand, we have solid waste that's regulated under the land disposal rules, and that's 329 IAC 10. And those regulations are really more focused on the disposal facility. Now let's look at the hazardous waste requirements for generators next. And I want to talk a little bit about hazardous waste generator status. I made a table here that has the different levels of generators and some of the requirements. Now, this is a very brief chart. This is not all of the requirements and all of the nuances that you need, but I really just wanted to give you a basic idea of the different levels. First of all, we've got the very small quantity generator, or VSQG, and then the small quantity generator, or SQG, and then large quantity generator, or LQG. And you can see when you look at that row where we have the rate, you can see how the volumes go up. Now that rate is based on how much a generator produces in a month, and it's everything that's hazardous waste added together. So it's not just one waste stream, it's all of them. As you go down the table, you see the different requirements that are in there, and you can see that under the VSQG, there aren't a lot of requirements. As you move across to SQG and LQG, the requirements go up, and you'll want to be aware of that. The other thing that I want to say is that, again, it is based on the rate of waste that you're generating, not the company size. not the number of employees. So there are some very small companies that happen to be large quantity generators. If you don't know your generator status, you should. And if you need help with that, you can contact CTAP or you can contact program staff. So you saw before that there were different levels based on how much you generate on an ongoing basis. In the new hazardous waste generator improvement rule, there were provisions for episodic events that are pretty relevant here. There's two different types of episodic events that are allowed, but basically an episodic event is something that doesn't normally occur, and we can have a planned event or an unplanned event. So a spill actually fits pretty well within the unplanned event category. It allows generators to maintain their current generator status while disposing at a higher level. And when you're doing that, there are going to be some disposal requirements at the higher level that are going to kick in. So for example, you may be a very small quantity generator and you might not normally label or manifest your waste. Well, with the episodic waste, you're going to have to do that. As I said, I'm not going to be able to go through all of the details. There's a lot of things to look at there. So if you do have an episodic event and you need some help, contact CTAP or contact the program staff, and we'd be happy to help you. Now, with those two different types of events, the planned events and the unplanned events, there are different notification requirements. If you are planning to do a planned one would be, say you're doing some maintenance in an area, and as you're doing that maintenance, you're generating extra waste that you wouldn't normally generate. That would be a planned event. You can contact IDEM 60 days in advance and go forward with that. Now, if you have a spill, you didn't plan for that, you have 72 hours after the spill to notify IDEM and to start on that path. I do want to note, and if you remember back on the table, that very small quantity generators don't have to have an EPA ID number. So if you're a very small quantity generator and you don't have an EPA ID number, you will need to get one. So I put together this timeline that I hope helps visualize. I like looking at things visually, and so this wrap my head around it. So we think about the start of the event. You have 72 hours. You're going to notify IDEM, and then from there you have 60 days to manifest it to a TSDF. A TSDF is a treatment storage disposal facility, and those are permitted facilities. Now, what do you do if you grab your sample because you don't have enough knowledge and you have to do testing, you're waiting for the test results to come back, and it's going to take longer than 72 hours? That can happen. So if you think you're going to have a hazardous waste, go ahead and notify IDEM, because after the 72-hour clock is done, you can't go back. At that point, you would have to notify under the under whatever generator status you would be. So if you were very small and maybe you had a large enough spill to become a large quantity generator, you would become a large quantity generator at that point. So this will save you from having to commit to that. So like I said, if you're not sure, you can go ahead and notify. If you get the paperwork back and you find that it's non-hazardous, you can contact IDEM and they'll withdraw the request. So I'd mentioned, or if you looked at the slide and I didn't point it out, that there were hazardous waste treatment and disposal standards. And I just want to touch basically on what that is. It's commonly called LDR, but not everyone knows what LDR is. Well, LDR, 3 letters, but it's a pretty, it means so much. That's the way I like to say it. But when you're subject to LDR, you're going to have to manifest your waste to a TSDF. You're going to have treatment standards applied to your waste. It's going to include regulated constituents, underlying constituents, and that whole figuring that out is a very complex situation. So I just want to warn you that that's going on. And you're going to dispose of it, as I already mentioned, at a TSDF. Well, what about very small quantity generators? And I'm talking about very small quantity generators disposing of the waste that they regularly generate, not the episodic waste. But very small quantity generators can dispose at a municipal solid waste landfill, or they can choose to send it to a hazardous waste TSDF. Now, the steps for hazardous waste management disposal, you'll need to get a container that can adequately contain the waste, that's compatible with the waste, that is going to prevent leaking, and then you're going to label the waste. And the label is going to have, there's different requirements now for on-site storage and transportation. So when you're storing on-site, you're going to have the hazard, not the hazardous waste code, but a designation of the hazard. You're going to have the date on it, and it's going to have the words hazardous waste. When you go to ship off-site, you'll need to use the hazardous waste label. And you see one of the pictures, there is a hazardous waste label on there. It's going to have the generator's name and address, manifest number, and some additional information that you wouldn't have on the label for the on-site management. That's a new requirement under the generator improvement rules. And if you have questions about labeling either on-site or for shipment, you can contact us. You're going to manifest the waste. And we are in a program now where you can either use a paper manifest or they're going to electronic manifests. I think a lot of people are using the electronic manifest, but if you're still using a paper, that's okay. There may be some steps that you have to do to make sure that that gets into the system. You're going to contact a hazardous waste transporter, and they're going to take the waste to a treatment storage disposal facility. Now, if you have solid waste, and by solid waste, I mean the non-hazardous waste, that's your spill, it turns out to be non-hazardous, you're going to have to contain it. You're going to have to put it in a container. Now, there really aren't standards in our solid waste rule for particular container types. So you just need to use some common sense and make sure that you have something that will keep the waste. You don't want to have waste in a roll-off going down the road that's not covered and the waste is blown at the top. Or maybe there's a liquid component in the waste and it's leaking out of the bottom. So you need to make sure it's not escaping. And you're going to take that to a permitted solid waste facility. Now, most of the landfills in Indiana, in fact, I think all of them do, have some sort of pre-approval program. And the reason they do that is because they're required to screen for hazardous waste. Sometimes they use the term special waste or a waste profile form. So when they're using those forms, that's what they're talking about. They're having you usually attach some information about the waste, test results. So get with the landfill ahead of time and make sure that you have your waste approved before you take it over there. Now, there is no manifest form, but you may need DOT shipping papers. Now, what if you have a liquid component? So either the spill was a liquid, or maybe you have some liquids because you had to apply some water to put a fire out. Well, solid waste is going to be disposed in a landfill for that waste. So it's either going to be a municipal landfill or a hazardous waste TSDF. Neither of those landfills can really accept liquids for the disposal portion of it. Now, you can solidify the waste on site. So you can take the liquid and you can add an absorbent like oil dry, an oil boom. Cellulose is a commercial product. If you have sawdust available, you could use that as well. But do note that if you're going to solidify your waste determination needs to be done before you take that step to solidify. Oh, one other note, if you're going to a solid waste landfill, some of them do have solidification permits or solidification pits included in their permit, and they can solidify the waste for you. So you'll just have to use your best judgment. Is it better for you to solidify at the facility? And I would think one of your factors you're going to consider is how well can you contain that waste with the liquid in it for transportation. If you can't, you might want to solidify on site. If you can, you might want to send it to the ultimate disposal facility and have them solidify for you. You'll save, well, you may save on transportation costs because you may not be adding extra weight. And your transportation costs are going to be influenced by the weight of the load. Now, what about other options? So say you have more liquid than you want to solidify or that I can do. Well, under the first dash there, I have an to a sewer, a ditch, or a POTW. And you saw Dave's video earlier where they had oil going into a ditch. That was another spill. And so a ditch is never going to be an option. It's not okay to just let that release to a ditch. You're going to get a spill. You're probably getting an enforcement case this time if you didn't have one already. Sewers are generally not a good option. Some of them are storm sewers. Some of them are combined sewers. It's just not really a good way to manage that waste. It's not necessarily going to go somewhere where it's allowed to go. Publicly owned treatment works might be a possibility. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. If you have on-site septic, just know that those on-site septic systems were designed and permitted to handle sanitary waste. So yes, you can hook your bathrooms up to them, but they are not really designed for any kind of industrial waste or chemicals. So please do not put it down your drains if you have an on-site septic system. Now, if you have an on-site wastewater treatment plant or pre-treatment, you could explore that, but you're going to need to look at your permit. You have a certified wastewater operator, and they can help you with that. Decide if maybe the amount you have is small or the type of chemical that you have, you'd be able to do that. But you're going to have to talk to them and you're going to have to figure that out. And I do have a word of caution, and I thought Dave was going to mention, some of you may be aware of the biggest fish kill that we had in Indiana. It happened almost 21 years ago, and it was that type of a situation that actually caused it. They were trying to put a chemical through their wastewater plant, and the plant was permitted for that chemical, but not at the end of putting it through. I think if I remember correctly, they upset the plant, and then they ended up bypassing the plant, discharging into the White River and killing, I just looked at the number, but I can't remember if it was 50,000 or more fish. So it was a huge, huge spill. Actually, in retrospect, they said it really wasn't a spill. They did this. So you don't want to do that. Now, can you take it to your local owned or your municipal publicly owned treatment works? You're going to have to contact them if you have a sewer where you can discharge directly, or you need to put it in a tank and take it over there. So you certainly can contact them. And I really, given the range of things that you could spill, I can't advise you it would work or it wouldn't work, but just know that that's an option and the steps for doing that properly. So at this point, I am going to pass the presentation over to Andrew Dryden. He's going to go through some specific things about our compliance and technical assistance program, and we have a new portal where you can communicate with us. So, Andrew, Jennifer?
It won't let me start my video. It says the host has, oh, there we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay. So will you be going through the slides then, Tracy?
Handing it over to you, Andrew.
Okay. It won't let me share.
It won't let you share.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hang on. If I stop share and then you start, there we go. That's what I needed to do. I was looking for that. Sorry.
All right. Are we good?
Looks good.
All right. So good morning, everyone. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk to you about the Compliance and Technical Assistance Program, the services we provide, and how we can help you prevent and mitigate environmental releases. So CTAP was created in 1995, and it is a free and confidential compliance assistance program designed to help Indiana businesses understand and meet their environmental responsibilities. CTAP is non-regulatory, and we have experts in a variety of subjects. CTAP services are available to all sectors of Indiana at no cost. Our services are completely free. We offer environmental regulatory assistance to Indiana businesses and organizations of all sizes, including existing facilities with legacy issues, new companies looking to locate to Indiana, trade associations, government agencies. You do not need to be an IDEM permitted facility to take advantage of CTAP services. So the Indiana Code 13-28-3-4 mandates that CTAP staff can't divulge information concerning inquiries, activities, or documents to the program that identify or describe an individual facility or operation, unless a clear and immediate danger to public health or the environment exists. So if you reach out to us for assistance and you disclose that you're in violation of an environmental regulation, CTAP staff cannot disclose that to the regulatory body of IDEM. Doing so can result in monetary fines to the CTAP representative and even possible jail time. So CTAP staff are not regulatories. Even though we exist within IDEM, we do not have the regulatory authority such as issuing fines or violations, and we can't even disclose violations to the regulating body of IDEM. So this kind of gives the freedom for facilities to open up to us and let us know where they're having issues without fearing IDEM coming down on them. Oops. So CTAP staff are knowledgeable in state and federal air, land, and water regulations, as well as waste management environmental regulations. If the business is in violation of a regulation, they can self-disclose to IDEM, which can reduce the gravity-based penalty of that violation by up to 100%. So if that's something that a business is interested in the self-disclosure process, that's something that CTAP can help with. So if you'd like to reach out to CTAP, our contact information is on the screen. One of the greatest services that we provide are on-site consultations to help businesses understand their environmental regulatory obligations, compliance status, and identifying pollution prevention opportunities, which include spill prevention and contingencies. There are 9 CTAP representatives. There's 5 in our central office in Indianapolis and 4 representatives in each of IDEM's regional offices. CTAP staff are dedicated to serving Indiana businesses, and I really urge you to reach out to your regional or central office CTAP representative just to get to know them. And these slides will be provided to you. So if you need to write down the phone number, or if I'm going too quickly, take a look at the slides, and yeah, please reach out to us. So CTAP offers free trainings on general and industry-specific topics like the one that we're having today. If you're interested in finding more trainings, you can visit the link on your screen. You can also visit the CTAP page for sector-specific guidance, fact sheets, regulatory updates, pollution prevention resources, and even event announcements. CTAP has recently developed a new database of better So if you go to our CTAP page, there will be a button to request a consultation, which will take you to our new user portal. From there, you can create an account and request assistance from CTAP. Your inquiry will automatically be routed to the and assigned to the appropriate CTAP staff. So this kind of expedites the process from what we've normally had. And if you have any questions about using the portal, you can reach out to any of the CTAP staff, or even just reach out to me if you'd like, and I'd be more than happy to help you navigate through that. But it's definitely a new tool that that we're moving forward with, and it really helps us expedite the process and provide the best assistance that we can.
Thank you, Andrew, for covering those CTAP slides for us, and we appreciate Tracy providing that waste management information. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat at this time. I will ask Tracy and David and Dwayne to come back on. And I did have a couple questions come in for Tracy. We have the first question was, can a VSQG get an EPA ID in advance even though they may never need it?
Right, and actually that's pretty common. There are some VQ.
Can't hear you right now. I didn't hear your response. I'm not sure if other folks did.
No.
So, okay, if you, okay, let's see if we can you try again, Tracy? You're unmuted. I think it's the internet connection, unfortunately. And we can respond in the chat if you would like. There was another question that are there limits to how much you can dispose of in an episodic event, such as X number of pounds? Tracy, do you want to try to take that, or are you? Sorry for the technical difficulty, everyone. I think it's the partially Zoom and partially internet issues. So. Okay, we've got, can you try to speak again, Tracy? No. Cannot hear you. Okay. All right. If the last question is, if I am disposing of DOT hazardous material due to expiration dates or other reason, is it classified as hazardous waste? And for these questions, we are happy to type them in the chat or respond, and we'll send the answers out to everyone with the with your certificate. So we'll just follow up on that. If anyone else has any questions right now, please put them in the chat. And if you had any questions, further questions for Dwayne or David. Tracy says that hazardous materials become hazardous waste when disposed if they qualify as hazardous waste. So you'll have to check those things that she went through today to see if they're on the list or if they are one of those, have one of the characteristics. All righty. Anything else on the question for the episodic event? Do you have the answer for that, or would we need to follow up with our other folks? Are there limits to how much you can dispose in an episodic event? She said no limit. And then what if it's sulfuric acid going to beneficial reuse? Not a solid waste. Okay. And then we had a repeat question from Steve McGuffin it. Are truckloads of sand or clay, dirt considered an effective diking material in a creek? That was a question for Dwayne or Dave that wasn't answered previously.
Yeah, that can be used. Obviously, you have to maintain that. Sand is not generally something we'll use in a creek, but as a last resort, if you're able to slow it down, that can be fairly effective. Clay would be better, but you also have to take into consideration what you're backing up and where it's backing up to as to whether or not you can actually do that.
Okay. Great. Okay, did I miss any other questions? I think we've answered all the questions here today. Anyone else have any question that we can answer for you? Okay, we just wanted to thank you all for being here today and joining us. We appreciate you hanging in there through some technological issues. I think Zoom has been overloaded these days, and we've got a large crowd here, and our internet unfortunately isn't supporting it very well. So thank you for hanging in there with us. The recording will be available on our website probably next week, and we will be sending a link out to you all with that information. We also are preparing certificates of attendance for all of you that attended today. So please look in your email for that. You will be able to use it for credits for PE credits or CHMM, professional credits, any other type of credits that you, educational credits for this event today. So no wastewater or drinking water CEUs, but we do want to provide that certificate of attendance for you for other purposes. Please look for our future events. We are planning some additional ones in the future. We are working on another document that will cover both solid waste and hazardous waste more holistically. We do also have in our series water E101 that is scheduled, and underground storage tanks, actually all tanks, storage tanks in planning in the future. And we also may be revisiting our air model here next year. We do have that online if any of you are in the area that you need to learn about air permitting or air compliance. You can also find that presentation on our website, and the manual that goes with that. We did a pollution prevention E101 a couple years ago, and that is also available for you. So thank you so much to our presenters today. Thank you all for taking your time to join us, and happy prevention of spills tip. And so signing off. See you later. Thanks.
Thanks.